Yeah, so the question for those online is kind of what's the goal in terms of the number of areas that need to be identified. So there's that target number was that 8,800 that I mentioned.
Oh, I see.
So we'll kind of go through each of the areas in terms of what those, we've estimated the amount of capacity in those areas. So that's kind of the target number.
The goal is to meet that number through some combination of.
Yeah, and that primary area has to be the minimum 25 acres. In those other areas, they have to meet that 750 foot requirement.
Thank you.
And I'll try to go through it a little more.
I'm sure everybody else has already got it, so thank you.
No, it's a good question. And this is an overview. We'll zoom in on each of these areas as I go through. But this is the updates. So you'll kind of see that many of the areas there were no proposed changes, but some of the areas do have proposed changes. So East Downtown was reduced in size, North Albany was reduced in size, but then Snake D is the proposed primary area right now, and that was actually increased in size to include the mall area. And then East Albany was also reduced in size.
And this was based on public input,
Yes.
And also we're trying to have a little excess capacity. We want to get your feedback, and we may be trimming, but we did trim down we trimmed down some areas and we grew one area based on public feedback. And so now we're trying to, hey, are we getting it? Are we getting closer to what we heard from the public? And then we just need to have candidate areas that can demonstrate there is capacity for some residential development, redevelopment, and mixed-use development. And then we won't need to implement all those areas necessarily. We just need to demonstrate that we've identified areas. And then when we do implement, we'll need to make sure that we reach that almost 9,000 unit capacity. And there's a formula that it's a little complicating, but you get to count existing developed areas, but we're really trying to actually have some capacity, or areas that might redevelop over time. And this is long range. It's looking at how many units might we need at 2040. Now, of course, time is flying by, but anyway, so just to interject there a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried to line it up to show where we were in February and where we are now. So this is the downtown area. So this would be a secondary area. So you already have existing building heights that are above that allow above the and then for each of these areas, I won't read it out here, but we've estimated a low and a high capacity range for each of the areas. So to kind of see how many projected units kind of based on the rules could fit within these areas. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's existing this number of units, but in the future could be this number of capacity in those areas. And then we kind of outlined some key destinations within each of the areas. And I'll try to focus more on where we made changes from the last. So this is East Albany downtown. So this area, there's actually, we removed some of the more residential areas. So there's some residential medium density and mixed use residential, I think that was removed. So the area was actually reduced in size. And then it is connected. You can't see the site A, but it is connected to site A. So it's a continuous secondary. And then so North Albany was also reduced in size. Kind of on the west end, some residential mixed use area was removed.
Medium density. The mixed use was kept.
Medium. Sorry, thank you. So again, kind of reducing the area in size. And so this is probably where this is where the increase was. This is the proposed primary area. So the Heritage Mall area and surrounding area. So it says primary and secondary area. That's because kind of south of 14th Street and east of Davidson would be a kind of an adjacent secondary area. So you'd have that 50-foot height requirement. but the rest of the area would have the 85. And actually, the majority of that area is at the RC zone, which actually doesn't have a height requirement identified. So you could, in theory, build to 85 feet in that area right now. So that area was kind of before was only right around 14th and Waverly, but it was expanded to the Heritage Mall, that includes Fred Meyer. So this area was not changed. It's between an Erie area, and it kind of runs right along the perimeter path. Some big area and some. This is so site F. South Albany also was not changed from February. And there's quite a bit on the east side, and there's quite a bit of big. And so here's the East Albany area in another secondary area. So this area was reduced in size. You can kind of right in the center. It's almost like a bite out of it, but that's kind of the area that was reduced. And then the center on the side there.
So before we leave this site, I don't know if anyone lives in East Albany, but one of the things about designating these areas that we're looking at is we're looking at areas that will have future sewer and water capacity, but also that are along transit lines, and also where we want to prioritize future investments of city funds. And so we know that a lot of these areas are already developed, but we know that we could use more pedestrian facilities and improvements so that we have actually the opportunity for people to get around without maybe needing to drive in their car. So we actually included some developed areas because we really are hoping to be able to prioritize investments in our transportation systems plan for some of the bike and trail network. So it doesn't mean that we aren't expecting anything that's developed in the last 20 to 30 years to necessarily redevelop, and we aren't expecting to see 7-story buildings. If I don't know a lot about building construction, but when you get over a certain height or a certain number of stories, the construction methods change from sort of the framing changes, and also the requirement for elevators changes, and it can get quite expensive. And I don't know that our land value is there yet to make it work. I mean, if you're going to go tall, you might as well go as tall as you can, right? To just make the additional expenses pencil out. But, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of decades. But we did an analysis for an East Albany area plan, and the economists assumed that we would probably just see 3- and 4-story development. We are seeing 3-story development, and we might see, 3- and 4-story development. That the market maybe isn't quite ready for super high, but not all these areas are going to develop within the next, where are we? We're 2023, 17 years, but we're just trying to set the framework for something that could be walkable and accessible by alternative modes. So.
I think that's a good segue into the estimated capacity ranges.
Mm-hmm.
These are that low and high estimate that I mentioned in terms of capacity range. The low estimate assumes more areas reserved for setbacks and parking open space versus the high estimate. And it's a long range plan, so many of these areas don't have that number of units currently there, but maybe 20 years down the road, it's more units within these candidate areas. But yeah, it is, as Ann mentioned, long term, long range. And so really high level there in the report, there'll be more detail in terms of expected code amendments, but earlier we mentioned kind of these areas you'll expect to see more of a mix of use. So allowing multifamily residential uses, commercial uses, mixed use uses. So they'll kind of see that some of these areas might currently only allow more residential focus, but the code updates in 2024 will involve all of these probably doing an overlay over the candidate areas to make sure that they meet the state standards allowed.
And we did pick areas where a lot of mixed uses are already allowed, where the heights would kind of meet primary or secondary CFAs, mostly 50 feet already, so that we could limit the changes that may occur, especially in areas where there's already existing development. So we really tried to look at, areas that had some vacant land and capacity, but also were already zoned to allow for what we want to see. And so that the changes would be minimal, mostly to, people buy a home or make an investment, and, if they did any research on the zoning of what was behind them or next to them, they might have heard, oh, well, this allows for this, this, and that. But, we wanted to kind of keep the changes, limited. My turn, right? Are you gonna go?
I was gonna go. You want
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, right. No, I saw it yet. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
you're right. Yeah, not yet. Okay.
So during the Justin reviewed the public comments, and there was a lot of concerns about gentrification. DLC did a good job of kind of anticipating that and included a specific, what they call anti displacement analysis as part of the process. So for the anti displacement analysis, they hired Portland State University to develop a detailed methodology and diagram analysis. A couple hundred pages if you want to go read all about it. But there's kind of three major inputs. There was vulnerable populations, housing market, and neighborhood change. And so the key with their analysis is they looked at change over time at a census tract level, which is kind of bigger than typical. And then assigned each of those census tracts typology based on what they found. And then they have specific anti-displacement strategies based on those different typologies. So on the left side of the screen, you can see all the different typologies they identified, from affordable and vulnerable, early gentrification, active gentrification, late gentrification, becoming exclusive, and advanced exclusive, as well as on the side. You can see how they kind of try to identify and define some of these. Again, refer you to the guide for all the details. But the key part is here that each of these typologies has different displacement strategies. And then if an area is unassigned, they suggest using any of the strategies to address them. So looking at the map where the potential CFAs are in the areas, as well as the PSU Anti Displacement Map, they made a map for all the urban areas that are CFAs. You can see the only area that's not unassigned is the downtown area, which covers CFAs A and B, and they're considering that affordable and vulnerable. So we're just talking about this today, and again, we'll talk about the strategies that the cities can suggest or propose. As we went through this analysis, we talked about how,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but does unassigned mean that there wasn't enough data, or does unassigned mean it's a unique threshold, or do we not know the answer?
fantastic question. So the question was, what does unassigned mean, and was there not enough data, or what? And so as we began to do this analysis, we were responsible for doing the spatial analysis. So doing the overlay with here's the potential areas, here's what the anti-displacement map says. When we pulled this up, we said, oh, well, there's a lot of areas that are unassigned. That doesn't really feel the most useful that it could be for our analysis, right? If it's unassigned, what does that mean?
Well, they're looking at factors that might lead to displacement. And of course, income, the age of the housing unit, how ripe is it for redevelopment? So there's certain variables that you're looking at. And so layering all those together, we're kind of looking at our areas, no surprise, where our older housing stock is. It happens to be where our lowest income, our highest percentage of lower income residents lives. And so, those are the two factors that I think personally in my research are why we're seeing some of these areas up here. But, these are the center of town is sort of our older area of town where housing was built in the 80s is now, 40 years old, right? So it's built in the 70s, it's 50 years old. So, I think that you're going to see it. I'll let, Nick continue. The COG did a slightly different analysis looking at some other variables, which may or may not be an indicator of whether somebody might be vulnerable to displacement. but they're also looking at other factors related to transportation, but it's useful information. So maybe that's a segue.
Perfect. So we wanted to do kind of more detailed analysis and just provide that as an additional tool for the city to use if it shifts. In our organization, we also staff what are known as metropolitan planning organizations. For here, the Albany area MPO covers Albany, Camden, Millersburg, Jefferson, and then portions of the counties. That's important just because that's where we've got a lot of. So while the PSU study looked at changes over time and housing markets and costs and things like that, we just looked at vulnerable populations. And for us, we define vulnerable populations as low income, non-white, seniors above 65, people with one or more disabilities, people with limited English proficiency, households with children, people 25 and older who do not have a high school diploma, and renter households. And what we did is we kind of treated them all equally. We'll say you're all vulnerable populations. Each one, we assign a point to each one, and then there's no weighting. And kind of we looked at, okay, if we add all these together, where are the just more vulnerable portions of the city compared to the rest?
And you say you assign a point value of 1 to any of those factors?
Mhm.
Yes.
Any one of those factors?
Yep. And then we ranked them and then we sorted them. So, if you had, so we took, let's say, for example, low income population, we took the census block groups that had the highest percentage of low income population compared to the rest of the city. And they were all at the top of that particular metric. So then what you get is really a comparison to the rest of the city. And so the darker blue areas are what we call the more vulnerable, lighter blue areas are less vulnerable. And again, this kind of tracks what we know about the city and Anne mentioned. And so again, this is just another tool that we're giving to the city of Albany.
So if you were to overlay the CFAs onto this, I mean, there's a lot more blue here, but one of my things about it is, there's senior living communities, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're low income and that they might be displaced, for example. But I do think, educational attainment, some of these other factors are obviously indicative of income, which then relates to, ability to stay in your housing, in your house. So it is interesting. I mean, areas that, I know are not low income are included. So, without going into the details, I mean, it must be because there's either seniors there. I mean, I'm making assumptions, but it is quite different. But, you do look at, when you're thinking about transportation and getting people around the city, I think this could be a useful tool, even with things being weighted equally, I guess, so. Yeah. Okay, well, so the state, I mean, we would want to do this anyway, but the state has got an anti-displacement toolkit, and we are required to look at those areas that were affordable and vulnerable, and then what strategies. So when I went and looked at the state strategies list, well, what? It's the same long menu of housing strategies that we have been working on with the housing implementation plan. Unfortunately, it's not like, raise a bunch of money and pay people's rent or whatever, which I think, keep people in their current housing or help them move into better housing. But I did a little research, and I just want to hit some of the approaches and strategies that we could look into. Of course, if we had enough housing, there would be more housing for people to move into that they could afford. So I think this is part of the current governor's push to let's get some housing on the ground and for our high water level, let's do it. But we want to have it at all income ranges, right? And all sizes and in different locations so that people can have the same opportunities to go to good schools or bright things or whatever. So then we need to preserve our existing affordable housing stock. The city has a little bit of federal money that we're using to help low-income homeowners maintain their homes. There's other funding. I don't know if it's Alice or. Yeah, it is. Okay. So the state has funding for publicly supported affordable housing. So that means housing that's really long-term affordable that receive maybe state or federal funds to make it pencil. And then those are usually affordable for at least 60 years these days, serving our lowest income residents, usually at 60% or below median income. But they have some funds to help preserve those units so that they continue when they get past their 50-year mark or 6-year mark, that they continue to stay affordable. But we want to keep our existing affordable housing stock healthy so that it isn't subject to, hey, tear down and redevelop a brand new high rise of expensive condos or whatever. So this effort is really trying to plan ahead to figure out where those areas are and see, what we can do to help people maintain their existing housing stock. And that will, we're trying to help people from being displaced, or if they need to be displaced, how can we help them through that process? So, and another related is income and your job opportunities and having commercial space. Now, I just took this off of sort of some national strategies that might help with displacement, but some people need to live close to where they work or close to the services, which is sort of what the climate friendly areas is all about, right? So I put that in there. But when it comes to,
So do you imagine that, because we're trying to do all that stuff anyway?
Yep.
Are you imagining that the climate friendly areas that you've identified might have a higher vulnerability? We would prioritize those actions in those areas.
Yeah, so we're just starting on the analysis. My first step was, well, what strategies kind of fell under the affordable and vulnerable, and there's this all category. And some of them are direct and some of them are indirect. I mean, a lot of the things on here, not necessarily going to help that one person, but if it could help increase our housing supply so that we have more opportunities for somebody who, let's just say it really makes sense to take, I'm going to use this example. We have a trailer park on Salem Avenue. Well, those people should live in, I think, nicer housing, but that may be a great location, or that neighborhood might be a great location. But if they could afford to move somewhere else, do we have enough housing that would be affordable in the right locations for them? So I think some of the strategies that we're doing is really related to our housing supply and diversifying that housing supply. And that kind of is where the state went with it. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at all tools, but I'm just hitting some highlights of the tools. And I'm sorry this is small, but there was a handout there. So we are looking at how can we support those those nonprofits and organizations that build that long-term affordable housing, because that's where we need it most. We may be building more units, but are they actually affordable, especially to those earning below 30% of their median income or 60%? So we're looking at some strategies that might help offset the costs for development for an agency that develops low-income housing. So one of the things we can look at is tax abatement programs. They're usually limited in duration, 20 years, some are 10 years. Can we help them offset some of those annual costs, and would that help them tip over to do a development in Albany? And I don't need to go through all this, but we've been looking at our housing stock and variety. Accessory dwelling units are a great way to, without sprawling out and using existing infrastructure, provide more housing that's small, but it also provides an income source for that property owner, which could be a homeowner that may need more revenue. Middle housing types, we now allow middle housing types anywhere where we allow single family developments. We allow middle housing types, which is a lot more diverse than what our current housing stock is. Most of our current housing is either a detached single dwelling product, or it's in an apartment complex of 5 or more buildings, right? So we have a few duplexes around town. We have some ADUs, but we really don't have that many townhouses. We don't have very many triplexes or fourplexes. So we want to encourage some housing types that might help people stay in their neighborhoods, right? And age in place, maybe. So we're looking at, are there certain housing types that we're not allowing? And so single room occupancy is a type of housing that we just want to clarify that we allow that. And that's, I kind of think of it as co-housing a little bit, but this is kind of popular for students right now, and also for single people, where you have your own bedroom and maybe your own bedroom and bathroom, but you share the kitchen area and maybe the living area. And that can make something a lot more affordable than renting a whole apartment and sharing some of those overhead expenses with your your fellow renters. We're looking at, just trying to do what we can to encourage accessible housing. We know that, don't have very much housing that we're all aging, and the need for accessible housing. So it's stuff like that.
Yeah, so sorry, again, newbie to this, some of you guys necessarily speak the lingo. Is there a decent sort of glossary that would explain to me how single room occupancy differs from, I saw adult dorms on there somewhere. Are those kind of functionally similar, or where could I go to find out about what the differences are?
This is a list of some of the strategies, and
Yeah.
we're really looking in at single room occupancy. We do have like adult care homes already, adult dorms. I mean, really, if you think about it's kind of like a hotel, or it might be converted over. So you basically have a studio apartment. So, something like that. So it's a smaller scale micro housing. We're looking at a lot of micro housing, but it's really like micro units. So we're looking at units that may be under 400 square feet or less. We're encouraging tiny homes. We're going to try to figure out how to encourage the tiny homes, which would be a little different product. But if you think about adult dorms, I mean, I really think you're looking at, it could be shared housing where you have a roommate, or it could be that you basically have a studio. And are we making more of those opportunities where they're affordable?
And so those terms are pretty consistent from one place to another. They're used.
Right. Well, we would define that for Albany. So these are things that we're looking into. What is really the demand? We need to assess that demand from our housing providers out there, those that are serving the unhoused right now. What can they actually afford? And a lot of what we need is supportive housing. So it might be like a adult dorm, but you've got the services and wraparound services, that kind of thing. We just want to make sure that we aren't providing that there isn't an obstacle to developing what we need. And whatever that need is, we want to make sure that we allow it. Certain locations may be better than others for some of those kinds of services. So we're looking at that. We want to support fair housing policies. As a city, we do that. I mean, it's hard for us not being the landlord ourselves, but we need to do education and outreach. For example, we actually do have a fair housing plan. We want to support our low-income housing providers. Land trusts are becoming more popular with these providers because they end up owning the land, so it's really affordable in perpetuity, and they just sell, for example, a home ownership situation. They sell the house, and that homeowner earns equity, but it's a lot more affordable because they're not paying for the land costs. But they still earn equity in the house. They can still sell the house, but it will always stay more affordable because a nonprofit owns land. So those are things we're looking at. We have agencies that provide rental assistance and renter protection. There are state laws and there's legal aid. But what can we do to support those efforts within our community and making sure that we can be good partners? So essentially, those are the kinds of things we're already looking into, and we're really going to prioritize those that we think might actually help in the situation of displacement.
And before we move on, it's like next question.
Yep.
So you have on here for the CFA implementation requirements for commercial.
Do you want me to explain what that is? And sorry, I didn't go over everything. So right now in some of our zones, we in our mixed use zones, we don't allow the lower floor to be residential. We require commercial on the ground floor. Well, with that infill, commercial keeps changing, have enough commercial space or office space. Well, why not? Maybe we could allow ground floor residential, and rather than requiring it to be above commercial or behind commercial, we sort of have this requirement that it be attached. Well, maybe we don't need to worry about that, so we're looking at that.
They're going to be citywide or specific?
This is just in our climate friendly areas. So, we do need, but maybe it would be citywide. With demand for commercial, it's one of those things, let the market decide. Well, sometimes you let the market decide all of your commercial mixed use thing gets eaten up with housing because that's what's needed. And then you're, oh my gosh, we don't have enough of this. But how do we make it work out for the long term? So we'll be looking at that. But it's just in the CFAs for now, but it might make sense to allow more residential uses in some of our sort of strictly commercial zones, which we would need to do in the CFAs. But maybe we could allow them outside of the. And with that, we've got Steve Faust with 3J Consulting on. I don't know if he wants to go over the engagement, but I do want to just say that this probably feels rushed to you. It feels rushed to us. And we have, this was a state mandate. It came with a little bit of funding, but some of the funding dries up on June 30th, and we may get a little extension on that. But we really tried to focus public engagement, on these climate-friendly areas, trying to get input from people. But we'll talk about the timeline in a little bit. But we, a lot of this is just really confusing, which is why we take an approach of let's look at the areas that are already zoned for allow this. Knowing that it might be hard to get public input on this. Well, if we're not changing much, maybe that's a good approach. Maybe it's not, But we do want to have enough capacity and have, opportunities for redevelopment. But we have done, this is the third public meeting we've had. It's not very, I can't see how many people are online, but I think that it's been challenging. We have tried to reach out and meet with, give updates to some different groups around town. But we're just in the identifying the candidate stage, and we will have a whole year to work on implementing that. And we'll definitely be doing a different level of public outreach for that. And we'll be, communicating with all the property owners in these areas that might become a climate-friendly area. So I just wanted to kind of say that there's just a lot going on, and we've been moving a little bit quickly. And but if you have questions or know people that might be interested in this, we are happy to move one-on-one outside of public meeting process. So I don't know, Steve, did you want to add anything to that? I sort of just took over there.
No, I think you did a good job, Anne. I think noting that we have been trying to reach out to different groups throughout the community, starting with stakeholder kind of group interviews, and then following up with some of those groups who were interested to present the candidate climate-friendly areas, and then finally, have offered them, we have offered them the opportunity for us to meet with them again to talk more about the information that that was presented today in terms of the proposed areas, and especially the information on anti-displacement strategies.
So what we'll probably do is just try to encourage people to just take a questionnaire. We want to hear feedback about the revised climate-friendly area boundaries, and I think this is a good segue to where we are, and I already talked about this, and I realize we've gone past our promised 30 minutes, but this isn't necessarily the final version. We're also still looking at this from an infrastructure analysis. We may be trimming some areas based on capacity until lift stations are in place or whatever. But we want to hear public input, and we hope that we've responded to the concerns that we've heard and trimming back areas where it, even though the zoning may not need to change, would this tip people over to developing in an area that maybe would result in gentrification, especially. And then growing the primary area to the center of town where you do have, maybe I hope we'll see some redevelopment of some of our large parking lot areas and some of the larger, there's a couple of big boxes that I think are underutilized. You might start seeing that. And that would be close to existing services, library, groceries, Target, whatever. So the next year, we're going to present this report to the state by the end of the year. We'll be working on this report, public input, and our policy folks will submit the report. And then next year we will look at, of all these candidate areas, which ones will we implement and what do we need to do to implement those by the end of next year. So it's kind of high level, but if you are familiar with areas, we'd love input. The slides might be a little bit small, but if you would love your input on this, we did the right area for the primary climate friendly area. And then the secondary ones, you know, are, what do you feel about it? Multiple or more as we engage some of the partners in those areas. But, and then if you have ideas about anti-displacement or strategies that you feel might be more of a priority, we'll begin working on implementing some of the strategies from our housing implementation. We're going to be working on that actually. We're going to start developing a work program that we'll hope to get started this fall and try to figure out how we're going to phase that in and work on those strategies, because the sooner the better for those strategies.
Make sure Matt pushes that survey on social media so the counselors share that.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So it should be on the webpage. I guess we could put the recording of this on the webpage. Slides will be on the webpage. But really, yeah. I mean, if people need to try this, if they don't know what the fund friendly areas are, you know, we're happy to help with that. But I will ask Matt to do that. Good idea.
There any questions?
Yeah, I don't know. Steve or Beth, do we have any questions? I can stop sharing my screen, which I will do here.
I don't
I'm
see.
not seeing any questions. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing as you, Beth. I don't see any questions online right now.
Well, this is not the last opportunity to ask questions. I didn't put my contact information here, but if you go to the city's main page, there is a circle that says climate friendly and equitable communities. You can click on that and get to me. You are probably on my mailing list. If not, just let me know and I'll add you to it. But we would like to make sure that we address people's concerns. You know, we're just in the identification process of candidate areas. But as we move forward and next year, identifying the final areas and then implementing the rules that we might need, if we need to amend some of the heights or something like that, we might do an overlay zoning, how we implement it. That's where sort of we are able to get into a little bit more detail with what that might mean, some of the changes. Hopefully not a lot. Yep.
So I might be displaying my ignorance yet again, but looking at the way that understanding that housing is the sort of the driver for this stuff, right? And there are a lot of other contributing factors. I didn't see schools. I didn't see any mention of schools anywhere in there. Is that implied in the zoning, or is it just completely absent from this process?
Well, so actually the climate friendly areas, we have to allow all those public uses, and they actually want that the state thinks, and we would tend to agree, that the best areas are ones that have places where people want to go or need to go,
Sure.
right? So that you're concentrating housing and services in areas where they're already going. So one of the reasons why the slides included key features or things going on in an area is just to identify for ourselves and to the state. Well, we are trying to look at areas. Some areas have some of these things. Some areas it could be future sites for the different things. Now the school does its planning for future school sites. Now the East Albany one is close to schools, but you know, the other services just, you know, we have, I mean, fire stations, you know, well, maybe future libraries or, you know, other kinds of services. So the reason why we're looking at mixed use areas is for all the other kinds of stuff, the non-public stuff, but then on the public side, parks, open space, even though these are dense areas, you know, it's so important that we have gathering spaces. But schools are allowed in a lot of the zones. So it's something we're going to, as part of our evaluation, we may need to allow them in more zones, whether the school will, I mean, I think they're doing their own planning. Right. So they project population enrollment, school population enrollment, and they look at what might happen in each of the elementary school and feeding into the middle school. So they've done a projection out 10 years, and I'm hoping they need to maybe do one a little bit longer out. And this may influence some of that work. They may need to revise their planning.
Because that's where I was coming to it from, is that if you're encouraging, you know, sort of low drivable, affordable housing, that's a pretty sweet spot for people with kids,
Mhm.
right? So I would think that there would be a natural draw
Mhm.
for families to those areas for a bunch of different reasons. But to
should
your
be.
point, we have different planning cycles and different planning priorities, so.
Yep. But here's the sort of the unpredictable part of all this. We may do this. I mean, the zoning's already there. Will anything ever happen? Don't know, you know? We don't know for sure where development's going to happen. Obviously, you need to have water and sewer available, and you need land to be available, and maybe at the right price. And maybe, you know, if you're competing, like let's just take houses, you know, one house is, wait, I'm really close to the bus stop. I maybe don't need to have 2 cars or whatever it is. You know, maybe people can start looking at, maybe they'll have some more choices when they're trying to look at their overall budget. I mean, transportation. So one of the reasons why these rules came into place is because 38% of Oregon's emissions and pollution are due to transportation. So that executive order from the former governor was really aimed at what kinds of things can we do to try to enable people to get around without having to drive so far, or maybe not having to drive at all. So it'll take a long time. You know, the other aspect of these rules was parking reform. We are no longer going to be requiring parking in the city. So among other things. Yep. Are there any, I don't see any, does anyone online want to raise their hand and ask questions and this time? Okay. Well, the slides are available or will be available online for those that are attending virtually. And of course, that questionnaire survey doodle poll is online as well. I haven't thought about when we will close that, but I think your input will be welcome for quite a while. We may take input through a certain time period and analyze the early input, but we're always, ideas and thoughts are always welcome, comments and concerns. And my door is open, Matthew's door is open, and the counselors, you can talk to your represented leadership here at the city. So with that, I don't want to keep people here longer than you need to be here. It isn't as nice of a night out as it was before. Actually, it's probably perfect if you want to, not too hot. But we do appreciate you attending tonight, and we'll have all the materials available, and we'll do a virtual push to try to get more people taking both the questionnaire, but also they could watch this recording, meeting recording. Okay, so that I think I'll close our meeting down. Thank you, everybody.